Thank you, Khalid. In the beginning of the 60s, two prominent political scientists, one in Harvard, Daniel Bell, and in France, Raymond Aron, wrote books about the end of ideology. In the early 90s, Fukuyama wrote the book after the collapse of the Soviet Union about the end of history. I don't know how right or how wrong the first two were. The second was surely wrong. And I remember the editor-in-chief of Le Monde wrote an editorial where he said, if it's true we are living the end of history, then we are witnessing the beginning of boredom. You know, during the Napoleonic Wars, which devastated continental Europe, the Swiss, who remained neutral, had a saying, les peuples heureux n'ont pas d'histoire. Happy peoples have no history. Well, we, the Palestinians, we are either blessed or burdened and plagued with too much history, too much theology, too much mythology, and very little geography. Now, my friends, those who chose to be our enemies have mobilized against us God, the Bible, Hitler, the Holocaust, and it's quite a challenge. And to tell you very frankly, Mr. President, I've never belonged to the optimistic school of thought that believes in predetermination, that the oppressed will inevitably be victorious. Unfortunately, history is a cemetery for oppressed people who remained oppressed until they vanished into historical oblivion. The common wisdom in the Middle East today is the following. We either have one people too many, this time we the Palestinians, or we have a state which is missing and needs to be created. The international community for the last 40 years has decided that there is a state missing, needing to be created. But let me tell you, history is still undecided. And the challenge for us here present in this room is how to help history make the right choice. Today, my friends, there is a concept in international relations that never became very fashionable, even though I think it's a very exciting concept: global tribes. The Jews are a global tribe. The Armenians are a global tribe. The Palestinians, who became the Jews of the Jews, we are today a global tribe. And let me tell you, you run into Palestinians, as you know, from Scandinavia to Pennsylvania to California to Australia. And today there is a sort of awakening of all those communities. And I'm very proud to say that in America, the major political battlefield in our contemporary times, our Palestinian community of all generations has played a very important role and are learning the ropes on how to play and try to influence decision making. They haven't been successful so far, but for communities and minorities, one has to give time to the factor of time. It takes time, yeah, Nihat. So my friends, history is still undecided. Now we, the Palestinian society today, we are in a lamentable situation. We are very fragmented. The debate among us is often very vicious, by the way. And I am personally very angry at the political establishment, left, right, and center, if it's not today that we are going to achieve unity and cohesion, when we are witnessing in front of us daily, even though we are in the diaspora, a genocide being perpetrated against our people. Israel has leveled to the ground the Gaza Strip, just as they did in 48 when 518 villages were dynamited, bulldozed, and leveled to the ground so as to make the exercise of the right of return impossible. And today they are trying to replay that episode by having leveled to the ground the Gaza Strip. In the West Bank, we are witnessing a politicide, whatever some of us might think of the political apparatus of the Palestinian Authority. It is a Palestinian Authority that is destined to become one day the Palestinian state. And today there is a constant endeavor by totally the Israelis on how to strangulate it and to suffocate it. And the worst scenario for Netanyahu is that Gaza tomorrow is governed by the Palestinian Authority, so that there is a sport of political reunification between the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza. That's his worst scenario, by the way. Now let me tell you, we suffer of several political sicknesses. One of them is that at moments we have elevated pessimism as though it was the only criteria to measure one's patriotism. We sit 4 or 5 Palestinians, oh, the situation is bad. No, it could be worse. It has become worse. We compete on who is more pessimistic as though it's the criteria of measurement of one's patriotism. It's a castrating phenomenon. Number 2, we have a tendency and an inclination to be seduced by the most maximalist position defended in front of us. Why? Because we are aggrieved. We are the victims of history. And yes, I would like tomorrow to have Palestine from the river to the sea free, and I would like to have the territorial water go up to Crete, where many of us originate, by the way. If you have seen the film Samson and Delilah, Delilah was the Palestinian, the Philistine, and the Philistines mainly had come from Crete. My friends, I am in favor of rational, strategic thinking rather than emotional phraseology and demagogy. And there is in international relations, had something called the balance of power. There is something called the balance of power. And in politics, my friend, any political individual or institution has to distinguish between 3 levels: the desirable, the possible, and the acceptable. And whoever mixes those 3 levels is either destined to a heroic suicide or a shameful one. And I believe if we want to behave responsibly, and we are an intelligent society, not always behaving intelligently, and I believe that today, we are in February 2025, we need as a society to have a soul-searching exercise, and I believe we have witnessed the failure of the political establishment, left, right, and center. We've witnessed the failure of the intelligentsia, we have witnessed the failure of the business community, and the failure of public opinion, which has been also often fluctuating between pessimism and adventurism, etc. So, the balance of power. Let me address the issue of the one state, two state, which I believe is often addressed not in a very rational way. Ladies and gentlemen, I grew up with the one-state solution, which was offered by Fatah in the second half of the 60s. That was our generous offer to those who had chosen to be our enemies. We have become the Jews of the Israelis. We didn't want them to become tomorrow the Palestinians of the Palestinians. So we offered them a unitary state that would be bicultural, multi-confessional, and pluri-ethnical with equal rights. I grew up with that. And that was our offer in a moment of political optimism, maybe naive political optimism. We thought we were in our march towards victory. And we knew that we could achieve this goal of a unitary state, the one state, either through a decisive military victory or by converting, convincing, seducing a majority of the Jewish component in Palestinian society. Well, my friends, at best, the war of October 1973 was a military draw. At best. It could be explained differently, but let's say, so there was no decisive military victory. And then, my dear friends, I used to know each Israeli who was in favor of the one-state solution, and you will agree with me that there is a limit of how many people one person can know personally. They were 0.05%. And today I want to ask you, do you want to live in the same state with Ben Gvir and Smotrich, etc.? Because they are not going to depart, my dear. They are wondering whether they want to exterminate us or not. That's the question. And whether they want to have a regime change in Jordan or in Egypt, etc. And by the way, they are already contemplating rhetorically, because Sisi is not being as compliant as they would hope him to be, about using the nuclear weapon against the Egyptian dam on the River Nile. And you know that all the population of Egypt, the 100 million, they live in the valley of the Nile. So hitting at the dam would mean a sort of inundation all throughout Egypt. They are already toying with the idea. My dear friends, balance of power, whoever wants to speak politics, or else don't speak politics, and balance of power today will tell you the following. Israel in the Middle East has the monopoly of the nuclear option, with whatever this might imply. Israel today on the conventional level has a qualitative and even quantitative edge vis-à-vis any possible combination of Arab armies. My friend Jahid alluded that after 73, studies showed that the Israelis had an air force which was equal to the French plus the British, the two major European powers. And I would add to that by saying probably on the operational level, they are even better because of more frequent operational activity and exercise. And number three, they have an unwritten alliance with the only big superpower, the USA. And let me tell you, I have news for you. An unwritten alliance with the Americans is even better than a written alliance. Why? Because the small party can pretend to be the undisciplined ally, and the superpower giving it all the protection and the means for their devastations can say, I'm not responsible for the misbehavior, occasional misbehavior of my protege. So an unwritten alliance with the Americans, which is more important. So my friends, balance of power, I want just to remind you that in the future when you speak of solutions, etc., it's not at the end of a good eloquent speech that you are victorious. It's the balance of power that will dictate outcome. The end game, I think it was called. My friend, one of the caricatures that we receive in our WhatsApp, etc., and I receive hundreds every day, was one showing Yasser Arafat on the beaches of Gaza in 1994 when he entered. And then the other one showing Ben Gvir a few months ago on the beaches of Gaza. Under one, Arafat on the beaches, it was written, that was the result of capitulation, abdication, etc. And under the other, Ben Gvir in the beaches of Gaza, our victory, etc., etc. But it wasn't the Israelis who made the caricature. So my friend, I think we need to revisit contemporary Palestinian history and why certain decisions were taken. Now let me tell you, I've been an ambassador for 40 years, and I was more critical than the most radical Palestinian. I'm the one who said, the PLO for me is at the same time an idea and an institution, and I'm more comfortable representing the idea. Jahid, what more do you want to say that I don't always agree with what the institution happens to do or not to do? So it's an idea and an institution. I'm more comfortable representing the idea. And I have said, Ya Jahid, on record, that we, the Palestinian society, do not have yet the authority we deserve. We deserve a better authority. Nor do we have the opposition we need. We need better oppositions. And this sentence, I have used it to criticize my colleagues in the authority, and very often to criticize the oppositions, whom I think were not better inspired, and had they been in power, they would have done a lousier job even. So, more criticism than that? Surah, I will give you more criticism with your permission.
So is it about the past or the current or the future?
You apply it the way you want. It goes, it's a double traffic. Surah, I'm the one, and I paid the political price for that, when the split occurred by saying, we, the Palestinian people, are plagued by having an authority with two heads, no brain. Yes. And I was speaking of the collective actor, not individual actors. We are all responsible for what's happening. We are not, as a public opinion, as demanding as we should be. So, my friends, for the leadership of the Palestinian national movement, and I'm thinking of the golden era of Yasser Arafat with Abu Iyad and Abu Jihad and all the others. The war of 1973, and most of you were not born then, but you can read about it because it's a fascinating example of international relations. The war of 1973, that some call the October War, the Ramadan War, the Kippur War, was a demarcation line in strategic thinking. Just to refresh your memory telegraphically, there was Egypt on the one side, Syria backed by Iraq on the other, and then there was the petrol front led by King Faisal of Saudi Arabia backing the Arab negotiating position. There were battles during this war bigger than the Battle of El Alamein and Stalingrad on the level of the armament used and the number of military personnel, bigger than El Alamein and bigger than Stalingrad. And all this war effort by the Arabs then was called Harb Tahrik. I want you to remember that, Harb Tahrik, which means how to reawaken and to activate. Tahrik and not Harb Tahrir, because they knew the challenge, they knew the balance of power. All this effort was Harb Tahrik, to reactivate the diplomatic front. I'm just telling you about certain realities. So the question today, and we are mainly Palestinians in this room, the question that we have to face with some courage, and by the way, to be a pragmatic, I call my school of thought principled pragmatism. To be pragmatic is sometimes more difficult than to be otherwise. My friends, the October War was the demarcation line in strategic thinking. And I personally believe that from 74 onwards, all the Palestinian parliament in exile convening started speaking of a Palestinian state on part of the land. Now let me tell you, we have to put the difficult question, is there a Palestinian military option? My answer to that, in the absence of an Arab military option, there is no Palestinian military option. And Faisal Husseini, and I regret his absence, Faisal Husseini used to say, if I want to defy Mike Tyson, who was world champion in boxing, I better not invite him to the boxing ring, bif'asni. I better invite Tyson to another game rather than the boxing ring. And some of us, my friends, enjoy inviting Tyson to the boxing ring. One of the anti-Zionist Jews that I have known throughout my itinerary was called Livia Rokash. She committed suicide because of the social pressure from her family and friends on her. She committed suicide, but she made a dissertation, Dr. Nihad, about the memoirs of Moshe Sharet. Moshe Sharet was the first Israeli foreign minister, and I think he became prime minister when Ben Gurion in 55, 56 resigned. And in his memoirs, Moshe Sharet says the following. When Ben Gurion accepted the partition plan of the UN, which gave the Israeli state 55% of Palestine and us Palestinians 45%, many leaders of the Zionist movement, my friends, went to see Ben Gurion to protest. How come you accept the partition plan? And he told them, my friends, we should learn on how to provoke the Arabs into provoking us so that we can expand beyond the narrow boundaries of our state. And he expanded from 55 to 78% in 48, 49. That was strategic thinking with an end product that he had in mind, not the blah, blah, blah that we frequently hear. We need political courage. He said, we have to learn how to provoke the Arabs into provoking us. By the way, if you study the war of 67, this is exactly what happened. What happened in 67? Israel, through Rabin, chief of the army then, says we are going to regime change in Damascus. Damascus, under the Ba'ath, who had poor relations with Abdel Nasser, reminds Abdel Nasser that we have an agreement of common defense. So Abdel Nasser has to make a statement by saying, if Syria is attacked, I will come to its defense and will join. Saudi Arabia, who was in dispute with the Egyptians because of Yemen then, says, but Abdel Nasser, you say you will come to the defense of Syria, but we have UN forces in between you and the Israelis. So Abdel Nasser is obliged to say to the UN, please remove your troops, hoping that they will say no. But U Thant, then Secretary General, looked at the statutes, and the statutes say that if the host country asks for the departure of the United Nations deployed forces, we have to. But it all started, the escalation of 67 started with an Israeli threat to the regime in Syria, and then the domino theory played, etc. So we have to, strategic thinking is something important, but unfortunately it's foreign to our concerns and our practices. My friends, Yasser Arafat is the architect and the locomotive of the contemporary Palestinian national movement. He was not judged favorably by history. He was unfairly treated, but I used to consider him as our Palestinian de Gaulle, who had to struggle against friends and foes to keep the rank of us, the Palestinians, undiminished. And believe you me, de Gaulle had Roosevelt and Churchill as his big allies who were fighting against Nazi Germany. We had people who probably found it easier to fight with us rather than to fight with the common enemy. My friend, I could speak endlessly. I know you would like me to end, but I could come back to principled pragmatism. Please remember the concept, principled pragmatism. I could come back to it, but as I told you, our challenge, Yasura, is how to help history make the right choice. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Thank you. I think this was. Thank you for your input. We're going to open up the audience for any questions. So if anyone has any questions for Mr. Afif.